Good morning, Justice Ascuna. Good morning, classmates. The report of our group delved on the ruling of the Permanent Court of Arbitration on the West Philippine Sea dispute between the Philippines and China regarding certain maritime entitlements. The main reason for this dispute is China's 9-dash lines, which it presented to the United Nations in 2009. The 9-dash lines encroach on a substantial portion of our exclusive economic zone. It is a vague depiction by China of its claim encompassing about 80 to 90% of the South China Sea. Since 2009, China has aggressively increased its efforts to strengthen and consolidate its position in the South China Sea, and it has resorted to various tactics. It has mobilized its Navy, militia, Coast Guard, and air assets to harass and stop foreign vessels exploring and extracting resources in the disputed areas. In 2013, it started constructing artificial islands, which were eventually converted as strategic military bases which could be instantly used in case of war. In fact, we are not the only country burdened by this problem. China has also encroached on the exclusive economic zones of Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, and Indonesia. As a result, these other countries promptly protested. It was in 2013 when China came up with a new map. It added another dash line on the eastern side of Taiwan. It seems, therefore, that the 9-dash lines are still growing. China considers the dashes as its national boundaries. This is very significant since what is enclosed by the national boundaries would refer to the national territory of China. Apparently, China considers the waters of the South China Sea enclosed by the dashes in the same manner that it treats its land territory. With this development, it would appear that China is grabbing or taking 80 to 90% of the EEZ of the Philippines. From China's viewpoint, there is just a narrow strip of water dividing our two countries since what is left of our EEZ is about only 20% and about 80% has been subsumed by China because of the 9-dash lines. These 9-dash lines has indeed elicited so much questions and controversy. China is practically arrogating upon itself almost the entirety of the South China Sea. What China is saying now is that everything within the 9-dash line is owned by them. It is an area or territory where China is asserting its sovereign rights, even if this will overlap or extend on the sovereignty of other countries. China now claims the Red Bank, which is within our EEZ, an area very rich in gas. In fact, China has promulgated fisheries regulations so that if any entity or person would want to go on a fishing expedition in the area, they must first get their permission. What is the agenda of China? It is crystal clear that China wants full control of the South China Sea for economic, security, and military purposes. China wants to take complete control also of all fisheries, oil, gas, and other natural resources within the 9-dash lines. Presently, China gets 50% of the annual fish harvest of the South China Sea. China has now the biggest fishing fleet in the world. It is now fishing in the EEZs of other countries to support its big population of 1.4 billion people. China, in fact, has the highest per capita consumption of fish in the world. China now claims ownership of this vast territory. It is also the biggest importer of gas volume in the world. Hence, China has turned its attention to the oil and gas reserves in the South China Sea, which per its estimate holds 130 billion barrels of oil. Also, From a military and security standpoint, the South China Sea can be a sanctuary and base for its nuclear weapons, particularly its nuclear submarines. At present, its nuclear submarines are present in Hainan. The U.S. aircraft, the Poseidon, flies over the South China Sea, surveying and shadowing all the nuclear submarines of China. Some basic concepts were presented in this report. Under UNCLOS, there are maritime zones. Under UNCLOS, China can only claim up to 350 nautical miles. We measure 12 nautical miles from the long water mark so that we shall have what we call as the territorial sea. From the edge of the territorial sea, you measure 188 nautical miles, and this is called the exclusive economic zone. We call it the EEZ because the economic exploration of the zone pertains exclusively to the adjacent coastal state, such that the living and non-living resources here, like gas, minerals, and fish, can be exploited solely by the adjacent coastal state. Hence, it is called exclusive. From the edge of the EEZ, you extend 100 nautical miles, and this will be called the extended continental shelf. The extended continental shelf can extend up to 150 miles from the edge of the EEZ if there is a natural prolongation of the submerged continental shelf. The high seas start from here or beyond the 350 nautical miles. The high seas belong to humankind. All the fish found in the area is owned by mankind. Fishing can be done here by all coastal states and all landlocked countries without permission of anybody. From the edge of the territorial seas to the high sea, you have freedom of navigation and overflight for military and civilian vessels and aircrafts. This means that any civilian and military vessel and aircraft can sail and fly in this area without asking permission from anybody. This is called freedom of navigation. In UNCLOS, an agreement was reached that all nations get 200 nautical miles. However, they must waive all other claims to other areas precisely because the purpose of UNCLOS is to provide peace, stability, and harmony in the oceans and seas of the planet. In the absence of this waiver requirement, disputes and conflict will continue. All 167 states, including China and the Philippines, agreed to this agreement and signed the same. This was an area of compromise so that a consensus and eventually a final accord will be reached. China now, however, is singing a different tune. It now asserts its historical rights, which is entirely incompatible with the UNCLOS agreement. In view of these developments, the Philippines made a protest. Also because economically, diplomatically, and militarily, we are outmatched by China, legal arbitration was our best course of action. The Philippines made a strong objection against China's 9-dash line. The South China Sea arbitration was conducted between the Republic of the Philippines and the People's Republic of China by the Permanent Court of Arbitration or PCA under the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas or UNCLOS. The arbitration is related to disputes between the parties regarding the legal basis of marital rights and entitlements, the status of certain geographic features, and the lawfulness of certain actions taken by China in the South China Sea. In particular, the following 4 issues are raised by the Philippines. Number 1, to resolve a dispute between the parties regarding the source of maritime rights and entitlements in the South China Sea. Number 2, to resolve a dispute between the parties concerning the entitlements to maritime zones that would be generated under the convention by Scarborough Shoal and certain maritime features in the Spratly Islands that are claimed by both parties. Number 3, to resolve a series of disputes concerning the lawfulness of China's actions in the South China Sea, vis-a-vis interfering with Philippines' rights, failing to protect and preserve the maritime environment, and inflicting harm on the marine environment through land reclamation and construction of artificial islands. And number 4, to find that China has aggravated and extended the disputes between the parties by restricting access to a detachment of Philippine Marines stationed at 2nd Thomas Shoal. The ruling of the case, China's response and its impact in maritime rights under international law in the years to come has been substantially discussed by my group mates. But here are some key takeaways. Number 1, China's claims to historic rights and resources within the 9 dash lines have no legal basis. Number 2, none of China's claimed land features in the Spratly Islands are an island capable of generating a 200-meter exclusive economic zone. And number 3, China violated the sovereign rights of the Philippines by interfering with Philippine oil exploration activities, prohibiting Philippine vessels from operating, failing to prevent Chinese fishing vessels from operating, and conducting land reclamation areas where the Philippines enjoys sovereign rights to explore for and exploit natural resources. Number 4, China violated its maritime environmental protection obligations under UNCLOS by causing severe harm to the coral reef environment with its land reclamation activities and harvesting of endangered species. In its ruling, the tribunal determined the legal status of certain maritime features occupied by China in the South China Sea, determining whether these are islands, rocks, low tide elevations or LTEs, or submerged banks is important because unlike fully entitled islands, rocks which cannot sustain human habitation or economic life of their own do not generate an exclusive economic zone and a continental shelf. Consequently, rocks do not give rights to resource exploitation beyond territorial sea. Furthermore, low tide elevations or submerged banks do not generate any maritime zone. The tribunal found most disputed maritime features not to be capable of generating an EEC or a CS. It classified Scarborough Shoal as a rock, and among those features in the Spratlys, it found Mischief Reef, Subi Reef, and 2nd Thomas Shoal to be low tide elevations, and Johnson Reef, Quarteron Reef, and Peary Cross Reef to be mere rocks. The tribunal assessed the status of these features taking into consideration their natural condition prior to human modifications. In this respect, the tribunal emphasized that China's construction of installations and significant reclamation work, as well as its maintenance of military or government personnel or civilians, cannot enhance a feature status from rock to an LTE to a fully entitled island capable of generating an EEC or continental shelf. By stipulating that the maritime features in the Spratly Islands could not generate an exclusive economic zone or continental shelves, the award helped minimize the areas of dispute in the South China Sea and provided a basis for the delineation of overlapping maritime zones. Indeed, Foreign Affairs Secretary Albert Del Rosario was correct when he said that for the Philippines, the maritime entitlements of coastal states to a territorial sea, exclusive economic zone, and continental shelf, and the rights and obligations of the states parties with these respective zones are established, defined, and limited by the express terms of the Convention. Those express terms do not allow for, in fact, they preclude claims for broader entitlements or sovereign rights or jurisdiction over maritime areas beyond the limits of the exclusive economic zone or continental shelf. In particular, the Convention does not recognize or permit the exercise of so-called historic rights in areas beyond the limits of the maritime zones that are recognized or established by UNCLOS. China is legally bound by the tribunal's ruling by virtue of its ratification of UNCLOS. The extent of which and how the tribunal's ruling might be enforced is an open question, however. The Philippines and others may be able to pursue a range of legal options to punish China should it fail to abide by the ruling or open negotiations to resolve the matter. China's immediate reaction to the ruling was to release two statements. A notably subdued government statement that reaffirmed its territorial sovereignty and maritime rights in the South China Sea and expressed its desire to resolve the relevant disputes peacefully, without making explicit reference to either the Philippines or the arbitration proceedings, and a much more hardline statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs declaring that the ruling is null and void and has no binding force. China's state-affiliated press simultaneously released a slew of articles condemning the ruling. In an article posted by The Diplomat in 2021 titled "The South China Sea Arbitration Award 5 Years and Beyond," they quoted that the award with its findings has contributed greatly to the development of international law of the sea and advanced the legal debate on the South China Sea issues in many ways. It has served as a legal basis for all the relevant states to review their positions and policies in the South China Sea. Philippines Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin, in a statement on the 5th anniversary of the issuance of the award, compared the ruling rendered by the arbitral tribunal to the North Star that will keep us on course in the present and that will point us back to the right direction in the future. He said that the Philippines firmly rejects attempts to undermine the ruling or erase it from law, history, and collective memories. He further stated that the award was final, that it constituted a milestone in the corpus of international law, and that it offered a valuable reference source for countries with the same problematic maritime features as those of the Philippines. One wonders why China seems to be so determined in asserting its stand and flexing its muscles to achieve military and economic advantage and superiority in the South China Sea. Is China out to prove something? Some opine that this is also some sort of vindication to an era in Chinese history known as the 100 Years of National Humiliation. This is the term used in China to describe the period of intervention and subordination of the Qing dynasty and the Republic of China by Western powers like the US, Britain, France, Russia, Germany, Austria, and Japan from 1839 to 1949, a period of 109 years. In an episode recounted by Orville Schell and John Delury in their wonderful book, Wealth and Power. The British Army set to humiliate the Chinese by attacking Beijing's Summer Palace, which served as the primary residence of the imperial court following the Chinese murder of several dozens British and French troops. The British took revenge by targeting the palace. Its destruction was to be a solemn act of retribution in which no blood will be spilled, but an emperor's pride and feelings would be crushed. As a deliberate act of humiliation, historian James Hebea explains that it was an object lesson for others who might contemplate defying British power. In 1900, soldiers of the Eight Nation Alliance entered the Forbidden City following the defeat of the Boxer Rebellion. In that period, China suffered major internal fragmentation, lost almost all the wars that it fought, and was forced to give major concessions to the great powers in unequal treaties. Today, the table has been turned. In his global bestseller, When China Rules the World, the author Martin Jacques talks about the end of the Western world and the birth of a new global order. Here he presents a groundbreaking look on how China's economic ascendancy will alter the balance of global power and how China will seek to shape the world in its own image. In 2013, President Xi Jinping announced the opening of the 21st Century Silk Road. It is a planned sea route with integrated port and coastal projects running from China's east coast to Europe, India, Africa, and the Pacific through the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. Indeed, the rise of China may well prove to be the defining economic and geopolitical change in our time. The South China Sea is a powder keg which is in imminent danger of exploding. The nations of the world, more particularly the United States, will not countenance this adventurism of China, especially because it has its own interests to protect. Furthermore, as noted by the author Kishore Mahubagbi in his book, Has China Won? There is the belief that the United States has a divinely ordained mission to lead the rest of the world in what Ronald Reagan called a divine plan. Pope Pius XII has also said that into the hands of America, God has placed the destinies of an afflicted mankind. Bush offered a similar view in 2004, saying, "We have a calling far beyond the stars to stand for freedom." In his essay, Perpetual Peace, the philosopher Manuel argued that perpetual peace would eventually come to the world in one of two ways. First, by human insights, or second, by conflicts and catastrophes of a magnitude that left humanity no other choice. We are at such juncture. In his book, From China, Henry Kissinger, who served as National Security Advisor and then Secretary of State under Richard Nixon and then Gerald Ford, had this to say: "Both the United States and China have been obliged to overcome their internal ambivalences to what define the ultimate nature of their relationship. What remains to be dealt with is to move from the solution of strategic controversies to their avoidance. Is it possible to evolve a genuine partnership and a world order based on cooperation? Can China and the United States develop genuine strategic trust. The future of Asia will be shaped to a significant degree by how China and America envision it and by the extent to which each nation is able to achieve some congruence with the other's historical regional role. Both societies believe they represent unique values. American exceptionalism is missionary. It holds that the United States has an obligation to spread its values to every part of the world. China's exceptionalism is cultural. China does not proselytize. It does not claim that its contemporary institutions are relevant outside China. But it is the heir of the Middle Kingdom tradition, which formally graded all other states as various levels of tributaries based on their approximation to Chinese cultural and political forms. The road to cooperation for these two societies is therefore inherently complex. The mood of the moment is less relevant than the ability to develop a pattern of actions capable of surviving inevitable changes of circumstance. The leaders on both sides of the Pacific have an obligation to establish a tradition of consultation and mutual respect so that for their successors, jointly building a shared world order becomes an expression of parallel national aspirations. We are but a tiny nation in the midst of this raging conflict and discord between two of the world's greatest superpowers. Let us hope and pray that Kissinger's elusive dream of the United States and China merging their efforts not to shake the world but to build it will come true. The aftermath and destruction which might ensue in a battle by these two superpowers is so unimaginable, frightening, and even would certainly be catastrophic. Also, because of our proximity to China and our ties with America, we may not be able to escape being part of the conflict. Hence, all stakeholders and players in the South China Sea must embrace the path of diplomacy and restraint, and even humbly extend the olive branch of peace. This will be the enduring legacy of our generation.